Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Larissa FastHorse's play, The Thanksgiving Play. I'm actually filming this on Thanksgiving 2023. So yeah, I timed it for that specifically. So that's fun. So the play itself is quite fun as well. This is a satire of sort of the liberal impulse to political correctness. And here, when I say the liberal impulse to political correctness, I do mean very much this sort of performative aspect of, I don't want to offend anybody, I want to make sure that everybody's voice is heard, etc., but without any real substance to altering systems of social power, altering traditional hierarchies, altering inequalities, or really making solid arguments about why people should consider things like the story of the first Thanksgiving. And by first Thanksgiving, I of course mean the one commemorated in U.S. Thanksgiving, the one at Plymouth Plantation, etc., because there were, in fact, Thanksgiving celebrations for thousands of years before the first Thanksgiving. And that's one of the things that gets pointed out in the play. So basically, in this play, you have four characters who are putting on a Thanksgiving play for a... they're doing it basically for a public high school. So you have Logan, who's the director. She and Jackson are in a relationship, and they are very much in this vein of, again, these sort of very PC-oriented liberals, very, very concerned about, like, not offending anybody and, like, cultural sensitivity and things like this. And in favor, to be clear, I'm in favor of those things, basically, but they do them without any real consideration of what could or should be done in order to actually address structural inequalities, systemic racism, the historical and ongoing treatment of indigenous people in the United States, Canada, and elsewhere, etc., etc. These are gestures. These are things that, and this is the big critique of PC culture, which in some cases is true and in many cases is not true, is that it is about making us as white people feel better, like we are not the bad guys. And Logan and Jackson especially are very much into that sort of vein. Then you've got Caden, who's a high school history teacher, and he very much takes the brief of a Thanksgiving play, both literally and historically. And so, like, he wants to do a scene in which the ancient, pre- or early historic ancestors of Native Americans and the pre- or ancient historic ancestors of Europeans, or maybe of the British more specifically, the English more specifically, because that's who the Puritans were, in which each of those groups of ancestors is celebrating an ancient Thanksgiving festival on opposite sides of a fire. Can't have a fire, it's public school. Can't do that. He also wants to go through the history of European Thanksgivings in what's now the United States, starting with one in Florida and then with one in Texas, both by the Spanish, and then going forward. That is not what Logan, who's directing, wants. Logan wants a devised performance, and basically if you're not familiar with the concept of devised performance, this is where everybody involved in the production gets into a room together and they figure out what they want the play to do, usually through improvisation that's then taken by a writer and melded together into something resembling a script. Sometimes it is a formal script, sometimes it's more informal. But basically, everybody works together to come up with something, and then they put it all together, and that's playing. So that's what Logan wants to do. Her idea is clearly that this is just focused on the first Thanksgiving, Plymouth Plantation, Pilgrims, etc., etc. But she also wants to foreground Native American voices. She's gotten a grant to do so. She's gotten a number of grants for this play. But one of the grants she's gotten is to foreground Native voices. And so she's hired Alicia, who's a professional actor. She's hired Alicia because of a headshot in which Alicia is dressed as a Native American. What I think the audience comes to realize reasonably quickly, and I realized reasonably quickly as a reader, is that Alicia is not Native American. Alicia is, I think she said, German, Irish, and a little bit Spanish, and because she is a little bit Spanish, she can play ethnic characters. So, like, she played Jasmine at Disney, and she has headshots of all these different ethnicities in order to get jobs playing ethnic parts, rather than hiring actors who are actually of that ethnicity, because, you know, that's not what we do. And so this precipitates its own crisis within the story, because Alicia is not Native American. And so there are these weird moments early in the play before that's revealed where Logan and Jackson are like asking Alicia about her experience of Thanksgiving and what she was told about it, how her family celebrated it. And she's just a normal white person. She's actually not necessarily a normal white person. She is simplicity. She seems to be rather vapid, if you want to be less charitable. But basically, she's like, she ultimately is like, I don't really want to devise anything. How about I just sit and stare at the ceiling? And Logan is like, wow, you're like the most amazing person I've ever met. Like, how can you possibly be so like comfortable and solid? And Alicia's just like, yeah, I don't do anything. I sit and I'm pretty, I'm sexy, so people look at me. So we get this sort of central tension that arises because, as Logan puts it, so we're four white people making a culturally sensitive first Thanksgiving play for Native American Heritage Month. Oh my goddess. And Alicia responds, perhaps quite rightly, given that this is theater. Whatever, it's theater. We don't need actual Native Americans to tell a Native American story. I mean, none of us are actual pilgrims, are we? And so that becomes sort of the interesting challenge here, is for theater companies that don't have Native American actors available, or First Nations, Inuit, Métis actors available in Canada, can you stage a story about Indigenous experiences or about something like the first Thanksgiving, which is an Indigenous experience, but is also this sort of massive cultural force in the United States. Can you stage something about the first Thanksgiving ethically without actual representations of Native Americans, by Native American performers or input by Native Americans about what kinds of things could be done in this production? That becomes the real central structuring challenge of this play that Logan is trying to put on. And ultimately what they end up doing is trying to come up with a way to represent the silencing of Native voices in the play. So, So initially what they're going to do is put on part of Caden's script, because he's written an extensive script, much too long, even for just a regular, like, full-length, like, hour and a half to 2 hour long stage play, and they have a 45-minute time slot. So he's written way too much. But they're going to take this one section that he's written, and they're just going to perform as the Pilgrims. And they're going to leave the spaces at the table where the indigenous characters would be sitting empty. But they're going to act as though they are having conversations, as though they are talking with these Native Americans. And the absence of those Native Americans is meant to highlight the silencing, the erasure of indigenous experiences, etc., etc. It's kind of not a terrible plan on some level. The problem with it is that it is literally the erasure of indigenous voices. Like, yes, you are highlighting it, but you're highlighting it by doing it. It's sort of like highlighting anti-Semitism by shooting up a synagogue. It's kind of not really entirely successful if to highlight something requires actually doing it. So we have that issue. Sorry. But ultimately what they end up determining is to just sort of have nothing. So sort of the core of the play, they end up, everybody toward the end of the Thanksgiving play ends up moving sort of out of the performance space itself, and it's just left sort of empty. And then they look back at it, and Logan's like, this is our play. The empty space here, this is what is going to represent the absence of Native voices in our play and in this story, the traditional story of the first Thanksgiving. Yeah, okay, whatever. You want to do it that way, you can do it that way. I don't think your audience is going to get it, but hey, maybe that's on them. So we've got all that stuff going on. The other thing I did want to sort of tell you about, in terms of the political correctness aspect of this, there's actually a point where Jackson says, we have a worksheet for this to add up privilege so that we can then equalize it. And he does this math. It says he works it out on a chalk or whiteboard. You know, he says here is, the white people are visible, so that's 1 point. The Native people have a month and silence, so that's 2 points. The story is written pretty evenly, so that's a point to both. See, the silence makes it unequal. So his critique of presenting the silencing of indigenous voices is literally that the silencing is somehow indigenous privilege. So his logic is that within the structure of this play that they're putting together, the silencing draws additional attention to the position of Native Americans. And his calculus here is based entirely on equality, not equity. Sorry, a brief interruption. I'm going to try and remember to edit that out. So, he's concerned with formal equality rather than with equity, rather than considering the larger socio-cultural, political, economic, etc., structures that determine relative privilege in the United States. So the idea that this specific play must enact an arbitrary scale of social justice equity kind of misses the larger point of it, which is, if the goal of this play is to promote the indigenous perspective on the first Thanksgiving on the basis of existing inequalities, existing deprivations, cultural genocide, etc., under the settler, colonialist, and capitalist regime, then having the play present at a sort of formally equal level both the perspectives of white pilgrim Europeans and indigenous North Americans actually still leaves a deficit, because white Americans are at a substantially better socioeconomic, political, cultural level than indigenous Americans, who have largely had their cultures destroyed by white people. So again, we've got these great critiques of this political correctness culture that's more focused on the formal appearance of equity than it is on actual social justice.